Life Church created this podcast because we all need healthy conversations with real people. So this podcast is here to help you start conversations with your life group, friends, and family. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the You've Heard It Said podcast. This is Allie, and today I've invited our friend John Mays back on the podcast to help me co-host this episode. So John was on our first episode of this season, and he also works on our life groups and life missions team, helping us be better friends and neighbors. And so welcome, John.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Allie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we've been talking about loving our neighbors through 5 key areas: well-being, families, education, justice, and community empowerment. But we wanted to finish out this season with more of a global perspective of how do we love our global neighbors, especially our neighbors in Afghanistan in light of current events.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to invite John to help us talk about how Life Church is responding to the events in Afghanistan and just give us a little bit more of an idea of how we love our global neighbors.
We'll start with the broader, like, how does Life Church respond to our global neighbors? And the one thing that if you've been around Life Church for any point in time, you know that we believe that relationships drive change. Relationships are the key to restoration. And what we don't want to do is go build a quick little relationship and then bounce, because that's not going to lead to the long-term change that needs to happen inside of a community. And so the way that we really support our global ministries is financially. And the reason we do that is we want to support the local church. We believe that the local church is the hope of the world, and we can do infinitely more together than we can apart. And so what we'll do is we'll partner with amazing organizations, a lot like we do locally, but they're global organizations. So like one of my favorites is Tear Fund. And so we will partner with them, and then they will go and partner with a local church, because these are people that live in the community. They're part of the community. They're not trying to solve somebody else's problem. They're in it. So you definitely won't know it's Life Church, but what people who are participating in these programs, what they recognize is like, this is the church. The church is providing this microloan. It's providing this opportunity for me. And so they connect the hope, the goodness, the things, the change that are happening in their life directly back to the church, directly back to the gospel. So the hero is who the hero is supposed to be. It's Jesus. But what you're seeing now with the Afghan crisis is now these global neighbors are coming stateside. So my last count, 47 of the 50 states will be welcoming Afghan refugees. And so now it looks like a global problem, right? But it's actually a local issue as well. And so the things that we're doing right now is we were lucky enough to partner with the Sparrow Project. They are the experts in Oklahoma for helping people resettle, for helping refugees resettle. And what people maybe don't even know is Oklahoma's been a large kind of a home for refugees for years, from the Vietnam War to recently Miramar. Sparrow takes the reins and really helps people not only assimilate to Western culture, they do a better job of helping Western culture assimilate to other cultures. So one of the things that we've done with the Sparrow Project is we actually hosted a live welcome exchange training. But the whole idea behind it is we need to recognize who we are as a Western culture, because we do have a culture, but because it's our culture, often we don't even recognize it's culture. It's just the way things are. And then we need to learn about an Eastern culture. What is it like? What type of culture would I grow up in if I am from a village around Kabul, Afghanistan? What are my thoughts about Westerners? What are my thoughts about Christianity? And then we have to look and see where those things overlap, right? Strong family values. Well, Westerners, family values. We care about our families. We care about our kids. So here's where they overlap, and here's where they don't. And here's where there's a gap or some distance. Now we understand, like, this is where these things don't jive. Well, if we want to be welcoming, our neighbors coming from Afghanistan, they're having to assimilate everything. They have to learn a new language. They have to live somewhere they've never lived before. They've gone from like a village that has a market where you'll get a ration of beans and rice and maybe some goat meat, to now they're going to shop at a Walmart and they're going to be paralyzed with choice. Like they've never seen anything like this. Everything, their whole life is now assimilation. So if we want to be a welcoming culture, really we just set the stage to recognize, like, hey, here's how you can bridge that gap, and don't ask them to assimilate to you. You assimilate to them, and just become really great friends with some of these families that have come over. And so what does it look like if you take somebody to the grocery store, and not only am I going to drive you to the Walmart, but we're also going to find maybe a market that has more of your flavor to it. And I'm going to prepare you my favorite meal, and you're going to prepare me your favorite meal. And you're going to tell me about it, and I'm going to tell you about this. And I'm going to learn about your culture because you're already having to learn about mine. We want to give them every opportunity to help us understand more of who they are and what they like and what brings them joy. Because when that happens, now there's no hero in the story. Like friends share their favorite movie or their favorite TV show, or, hey, let me send this podcast to you. That's what we want this to be, an exchanging of lives versus just, well, let me show you how to be a great American.
Well, that's such good perspective for all of us. Thank you for sharing that. And I love how all of it goes back to relationships, which is what we've been talking about all season long. Like it's impossible to neighbor well if we don't know who we're neighboring. And so we've invited our favorite Swedish pastor back on the podcast to give us even more perspective about how his church is responding and how we as the church can respond and love our global neighbors. So let's hear now from Pastor Joachim Lundqvist. Pastor Joachim, thank you so much for coming back to be with us on the You've Heard It Said podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me again. It's always a joy, always a pleasure.
Well, the last time that you were here, you talked all about generations. And I know that so many of our groups really liked being able to talk about that with even different groups. So like I know that we had a college student who shared it with her dad's life group, and they had a really great discussion about it. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's brilliant. I'm so excited to hear that.
And I've heard that you have some more content about generations coming up. Is that right? Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, I do. I've actually just finished recording a 10-episode series for the web on generations because there's so much more to say than you can get into one single message or one single podcast. So there's a 10 times 45-minute series, especially for leaders and teams and pastors, but I hopefully for anyone to enjoy that is interested in these themes. So it's actually out now on patreon.com/Pastor Joachim. Anyone can go in there and sign up and access to it.
That's awesome. We'll make sure to link to that in our conversation guide too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've been talking all season long about how we love our neighbors. And so we've been really focused on loving our neighbors within our cities and communities. But we wanted to have you on to tell us a little bit more about how we can love our global neighbors.
Right.
And so to start, I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about the work that your church has been doing in Afghanistan.
Yes, actually, we've been on the ground in Afghanistan for 19 years. It's very different the way we approach the mission field. Sometimes we respond to an urgent need, an immediate need. Sometimes it's just a hunch we are given after praying and just feeling God's leading us in a certain direction. And with Afghanistan, that was actually the origin. We simply felt that God gave us a heart for Afghanistan and the neighboring nations like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, those nations surrounding Afghanistan. We started working there. Of course, there are easier nations to work in, but for some reason, God has always led us toward the tough and the hard nations. So for a number of years, we've been working underground. We've been working with orphanages. But of course, now these past few months, things have escalated. And now we also see the hand of God in Him before all this happened to kind of get to know the nation, the infrastructure, the people, the contacts, and just simply also being on the ground now that the nation is closing up and be able to help from the inside out.
Wow. So how did you guys start building those relationships so that you could be there, especially whenever the crisis escalated?
Yeah, our policy and our concept for mission work has always been that we are sending people from our church in Sweden to pioneer our work, but they know if they're not going to stay. As soon as possible, we want to train up the locals to run the work. Wherever there is Word of Life, we want it to be run by people from that very nation.
Yeah.
So the vision will be the same, but the cultural context will be different. So we started out with permanent missionaries. in Afghanistan. And then gradually we started passing the responsibility over to local leaders.
Okay.
And through them that we're now working. Also, they're giving us firsthand reports that actually are quite alarming. There are a lot of news that are not being brought out, not being distributed, and especially about the persecution of the Christian population. And you brought up loving our sisters and brothers, loving our neighbors.
Yeah.
And there's a huge need for that right now. You know, as far as we are concerned as Christians, the body of Christ is global. Of course, first of all, it's expressed through the local family, the local church. But I mean, it's clear that we belong together. And if one part of the body suffers, then we all suffer. And we're all called to help and bring relief any way we can.
Absolutely. I love that you guys are investing in those relationships. And something that you said reminded me a lot of our approach. We believe in community empowerment so that the leaders within the community are the ones who are driving that change because they know the culture. And so what are some lessons or surprises that you all have had as you've started this work?
Well, of course, you always have to adapt to certain cultures, and there's always lessons to learn, and you need flexibility wherever you're going to work. As of now, we've seen the enormous potential and strength of having a network now established in the nation. See, what happens now, and this is really alarming, is that the Taliban are kind of closing down the nation in the sense that they're gathering cell phones so that people will not record or distribute what is about to happen. So first of all, initially they said, okay, we're not as bad and people will have their freedom. But now gradually the nation is shutting down. And we also know from experience that the Christians are going to face a time of horrible persecution. The advantage that we have right now is we know what the Christians are. There's a big challenge that most of the Christian families are spread out on the countryside. Now, because the Afghans have been granted a certain freedom in these past few years. They have been able to be open with their Christian faith. So that means living in a small community, you know, everybody knows everybody. And then, of course, they saw no need to cover up the fact that they believe in Jesus. But all of a sudden now, the Taliban are going all over the place, especially into the smaller communities. They're offering money to people to give up the identities of the Christians. And when they find them, they kill them, they imprison them, and if they had daughters that are 20 years or less, those are given away as sex slaves to Taliban warriors. So our mission right now is simply to go from village to village, track down the Christians before the Taliban do, and bring them out. We have taxi cabs all over the nation right now, picking up entire families. Now, a normal Afghani family will be 10 to 12 people, and bringing them into the cities, because in the cities they can disappear. We have shelters ready and prepared for the families, and in the cities it's almost impossible to track them down. And because the borders are still closed, that's the best thing we can do, and that's the real emergency, to get the families off of the countryside where they can be easily spotted and to bring them into the cities where they can be safe.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for the work that your church is doing over there, especially right now. And so with all of that, there's so much heaviness and there's so much darkness.
Yeah.
So how do you and your church maintain this sense of God's goodness and his power when things feel so dark?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. What we're doing right now is that we're also putting as many of our trusted people in Afghanistan on staff as possible. You know, normally they would have some other kind of business and they will help out in the underground churches. They will help people on their spare time because, of course, they have to make a living. But all of a sudden now, with the different conditions, the different circumstances, we're providing everyone that we can with a salary to liberate them to travel. And we clearly said to them that as you travel, you should do two things. And one is identifying the Christians, get them out of harm's way, help them escape persecution, just save their lives, basically. But the other one is preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, preach the good news, which is that there's light in darkness, there is hope in hopelessness, there is peace in the middle of the turmoil and the storm. And actually, the reports that we are getting is that even some of the Christians that has been given the opportunity to escape have chosen to stay behind. Because in times of great darkness, they don't want to leave. They want to stay and minister to their friends and their sisters and their brothers. That speaks volumes to me, because that means that, just as you said, it's not only darkness, but in the darkness, actually, light shines. And that's the essence of the kingdom of God. We've always been surrounded by persecution and tough times, and will always be. That's a natural consequence of Christianity. And Jesus said this would happen. But in the middle of all that, there is the joy, there is the peace, and there's the excitement of knowing that He has already delivered us out of the kingdom of darkness. And even if we might see a lot of darkness with our eyes, nothing can change the fact that we are already set free and delivered, and we are all going to spend eternity in freedom and in the presence of God.
Yeah, it really does make the gospel come alive. It's like we have the assurance of knowing how it ends, and so that can provide hope. So I love that you share that. That's really powerful.
And even, looking at church history, I'm a history freak myself. I love study, especially church history. The church has never been better off than in times of persecution. And we interpret any kind of persecution in the way that something must be wrong, or we need to fight back. But actually, if we look at the church history, even today, in what nations is church thriving the most? It's not in the nations where there's like Christian leaders or prime ministers or presidents and the Christians are being granted a whole lot of freedom. Actually, the church is thriving in the areas where the persecution is the greatest. Of course, I'm not saying we should strive for that or we should provoke persecution. The Bible is clear about that. You should not suffer because you're messing up, But when we end up in that position, Jesus' instruction to us is not to be bothered and annoyed and irritated. He says, lift up your eyes. Lift up your eyes when all these things are happening, because your redemption draws nigh. And that's also what we're seeing in Afghanistan right now.
That's such good perspective. So I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about your church and the growth that you've seen. Because even the last time that you were here, you were talking about how your church has seen a wave of people coming through. And so I wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about that.
I mean, Sweden has got a great amount of immigration throughout the years. And we saw a huge influx, especially in 2015. And I do believe that many people, even over here, would have heard about what was referred to as the refugee crisis in Europe. That was ISIS at its peak. And so many people, hundreds of thousands of people, were just simply fleeing the Middle East primarily, and also Afghanistan. And the desperation level was so intense that you would get into an inflatable boat with your entire family and take the risk of dying at sea. Rather have that than the fear of staying back home and having your whole family might be murdered, raped by the ISIS. So that said a lot. And as the refugees came, and their whole goal was really to reach Athens, which is the capital of Greece, right at the southern tip of Europe in the Mediterranean Sea. And many reached Athens, and then they started to walk up north. And many were heading for Sweden. This just happened overnight. And all of a sudden, everyone in Sweden through media realized that, okay, within weeks, we're going to have an influx of tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people coming with nothing. And there was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of concern, and I could fully understand that. But there also was a lot of fear in Christian circles. Oh, the Muslims are coming to take us and things like that. So I gathered my pastors and we had days of prayer and asked God, okay, how do we position ourselves in the face of this? And we really felt God just challenging us and asking us, okay, guys, do you want to build a church of faith or a church of fear? And we needed to respond to that calling and say, we want to build a church of faith. And I realized that faith is not denying the problem, but faith is choosing to see the potential inside the problem, fixing your eyes of what might happen. And we just had this inner sense that somewhere inside this humanitarian disaster, there is a seed of revival. because so many of these people that are now coming our way, we couldn't have reached them in their own nations.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden we can reach them with the love of God. And to make a long story full of miracles really short, what we've seen since is nothing short of a miracle. We've been praying for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Muslims that have accepted Christ. And they have turned out to be so much more open actually than Westerners, because they have the concept of God. They have a basic respect for the fact that there might be a God. They just didn't like what was introduced to them through Islam. But still, when they hear about the gospel, when they hear about a God of love that came down to our level, because you can rule from above, but you can only embrace from the side. And Jesus comes and becomes man simply so that he can embrace us. We just saw an amazing response. And now I got so many church members named Muhammad that I can't even count them all. And little did I know just a few years ago that we would see that dramatic change that would come to our church through hundreds and hundreds of Muslims that have accepted Jesus Christ. And of course, we were so close to missing it. I mean, if we would have positioned ourselves in a different way and pointed our fingers and complained about this scenario, then we would have missed it. But I do believe the church is always called to serve the people. We're not called to point fingers. We're not called to judge. We are called to be there as the outreached hand of Jesus Christ and doing whatever we can to show his love and his gospel.
You're preaching. I love it. That's so good.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that you chose to have this posture of faith and of acceptance. And I think that's a really great model for all of us. As all over the U.S., we will be experiencing Afghans reintegrating into our communities. Right. And so what are some ways that we can learn from you all in that and love them well and support them as they integrate in our communities?
That's a great question. And I'm so glad you're bringing it up, because many just simply don't ask the question. Most people would just rely on the government to take care of all that, and you would not see your own responsibility. The first thing I would say to Christians would be, don't look too much at the exterior. We're always scared to a certain extent about what is different. And that's natural. That's not strange. But if you look beyond the exterior of the different culture, the different appearances, and just treat them as amazing, wonderful people, you will have a great shock. Because these people are wonderful, wonderful people. They come with a strong sense of family. And I was amazed myself, because when all these Muslims became Christians and became part of our church, the first thing I noted is that they want to serve. To them, family is super important. And now church is their family. So as long as they get a good impression of us being hospitable and loving and really caring about them and asking about how you guys are doing, as long as they feel invited, they will want to contribute. And even if they're not Christians, as you meet them, just love on them. Islam, there is no such thing as love in the sense that we understand it from a Christian point of view. So the best language to communicate the gospel is always going to be love, especially when it comes to people from that part of the world.
That's such good advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I wondered if you could share a story, maybe one of your favorite stories that have come from some of your work in Afghanistan.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind really is the story of an Afghani family. This was right at the beginning of the big influx of refugees. This family was still living in Afghanistan outside of Kabul. And there was a husband and a wife, and they had 6 children. Now, one day, a Taliban warrior is knocking on their door. He demands to speak to the father, and he says, I want your 12-year-old daughter as my wife. And of course, the father, he tried to find a way out of it. He said, I cannot give her away. She's just a child. And the Taliban warrior said, okay, I'll be back tomorrow with my army, and you will be left with the choice of either giving that girl to me or I will kill your entire family. And that night, as the family went to sleep, the man stayed open. And he was, of course, in agony, having to find a way in this horrible situation. So he rolled out his prayer mats and he faced Mecca, like he'd been doing many times as a devout Muslim. And he started to call to Allah for help. But right in the middle of the prayers, he realized that he's been praying to Allah all his life, and Allah has never answered him. But then in the back of his head, he remembers that somebody once told him that there is a Christian God. So in the middle of the night, in the middle of the darkness, he starts to call out, "Oh, Christian God, oh, Christian God, if you're out there somewhere, and if you can hear me and help my daughter." And as he calls out that, a man appears in the room, shining a bright light. And he starts to speak to this Afghani Muslim. And he says 4 kind of strange things. He says, "When you're hungry, I will give you food. When you're naked, I will give you clothes. When you're hopeless, I will give you hope. And when you're in darkness, I will give you light." Then he instructs the man to wake up his family, take their basic belongings and flee to the south. And says, "I'll be with you." And long story short, they end up on one of these inflatable boats, the entire family, with all their possessions in that little boat, heading for Greece. And as they approach Greece, the first thing that they see is our young people who are manning our Welcome to Europe station and helping the refugees on their first arrival and on their upcoming road up to Sweden in the north. And our young people are carrying signs saying, "If you're hungry, we have food. If you're naked, we have clothes. If you're without hope, we have hope. And if you're in darkness, we have light."
Wow.
And this family realizes that those young people are connected somehow to that man that appeared in our house in Afghanistan. And they gave their hearts to the Lord. And now they're in Sweden in safety, and just seeing that girl that is now 17, knowing what would have been unless Jesus hadn't saved her. But even more than that, I just have the sense that fear of God strikes my heart sometimes. Knowing how much Jesus depended on us, knowing how much he counted on us. Instead of saying, "I'm Jesus," he completely assumed that we would be there with those signs, that we would not step away, not shy away, but that we would actually be there to do whatever we could. And he completely identified himself with that mindset of reaching out and doing whatever we could to help. And I probably will never, ever forget that.
Yeah.
And I do believe that maybe as a part of your previous question, what can we do? You know, as we reach out and as we do whatever we can, we know that Jesus is going to be right there. Whatever we have done for the least of these, we have done for him.
That's incredible. When you share that, it just makes me think of, I planted the seed. So somebody at one point in time had planted a seed of who Jesus was or who the Christian God was.
Exactly.
And then your church was there to water it, and then
Yeah.
God made it grow. That's incredible. Okay, so do you have any final advice or encouragement for us as we think about how we can more intentionally love our global neighbors?
Being reminded of a few of Christ's last words before being ascended up to heaven. He said, you know, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." It doesn't necessarily say first Jerusalem and then Judea and then Samaria. You know, it's not like in a certain order. You should be in all 4 areas at the same time. You could be like his outreached hand locally in your own neighborhood, and at the same time you can partner with whatever your church is doing to serve the refugees, and at the same time you can also help out and serve on a global scale, which is amazing that we live today and we can do all that regardless of where we are based. But first of all, you know, it would be, of course, the immediate surroundings. Put aside preconceived ideas. Don't be afraid for what might be new and unnatural. Remember that the body of Christ is bigger than our nation. And be generous with love and care and attention. And as you are, I would be very surprised if God will not respond with a number of incredible miracles in the lives of these people. At the same time, of course, look around and see, well, what can we do together on all these 4 scales, the Jerusalem, the Judea, the Samaria, and the global scale. Right now, for example, we have many Word of Life churches in the neighboring nations of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And we know that sooner or later the border is going to open again and people are going to flood out by the tens of thousands. So right now we are building up our churches in the neighboring nations to handle that kind of influx and be prepared to share the gospel on a massive scale. So we don't know what God has got in mind, but we should just be as ready as we possibly can. And never, of course, forget that the small seed, like you said, the small seed you plant out of kindness or love or the gospel, it will never return void.
Everything that you shared has been so encouraging. And thank you so much for the work that your church is doing. And thank you for sharing with us things that we can do to be the church for our local and our global neighbors. So we just really appreciate your time. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Man, every time we get to hear from Pastor Joachim, I'm so inspired, and he has the best stories.
Yeah, that was so good. Man, one of my favorite things that he said, and I wanted to point out and make sure that we got, is that the best language of the gospel is love. It's simply love. As we get ready to welcome our Afghan neighbors into our cities, it's so important to be welcoming and to love them right where they're at. Like without this expectation, I can't remember who said this, but if my goal when I meet somebody is to lead them to Jesus, like if I have an agenda, then every person I meet is my target, right? But if I trust that God is working in them just like he's worked in me, then that frees me to allow every person I meet to be my friend. As we think through that, as we're welcoming these folks into our cities, into our communities, yes, do we know the hope and his name is Jesus? Absolutely. And as true as that is to us, it is possible that maybe they believe something completely different. And leaving space for that and showing them this is what our God looks like. We know how loved we are. And because of how we understand that love, we basically project and reflect that love into everybody we meet, including our neighbors, so much so to the point where it just leads to conversations. It leads to curiosity. And you know what? Maybe that conversation never has an opportunity to happen, but you love them and you love them well. And we trust that God's not going to let that love return void, right? That nothing we do out of love is ever wasted. We may not get to see the end game. We may not get to see the result, but we trust God with it. And so I think when we step into those relationships and we just trust God to do what only God can do, and I just do what he asked me to do. He just told me to love my neighbor as myself, right?
Yep.
So if we can do that, I think we're being in really good shape.
I like that. That feels very freeing for all of us to think about. So, like always, we hope that this conversation isn't just something that you listen to and then move on with your life, but that it's something that informs how you live and that it starts a conversation with people that you care about. And so we want to challenge you to have a conversation with a neighbor or your life group or a friend, starting with this question: how could I more intentionally love my global neighbor?
Well, I don't want to be like overly blunt, but I'm going to be. So this is the You Heard It Said podcast. And so we want you to listen to it and then we want you to talk about it, but don't just talk about it. Like do something with it. This is a big deal. I mean, if God has put it on your heart to figure out how to love your neighbor, maybe you've taken a step in one of these other episodes that you've listened to. Hey, that's fantastic. But if you haven't, and this is where God is pulling you, take an action step. Like do something. This is going to play out all through 2022, and there will constantly be new families. And so reach out to your life groups and missions pastor and just ask them who's doing what work, how can I get more information on walking alongside my neighbors? Or maybe you just want to get your hands on the cultural training that we talked about. That is an option as well. Figure out what it means to be really a welcoming neighbor, and then find a place to plug in. It's probably the best thing that you can possibly do. And then, as always, just be an advocate. This is going to continuously be a hot topic. People are going to have strong opinions about it. And you learn how to be an advocate, learn how to be a voice for those maybe without a voice, but in a way that doesn't alienate somebody with a different opinion, right? Because again, nobody likes to be preached to. No one likes to be talked at. Ask questions, figure out why they think the way they think, and maybe just offer a different perspective. I think all those things will be, one, not only life-giving for you, it will help you grow. It will help you understand the gospel in ways that you just really don't get simply by reading the text. Sometimes when we actually do the text, when we welcome the foreigner, the gospel lights up and gives everybody an opportunity to thrive.
Thanks for listening to You've Heard It Said. We hope today's episode will inspire you to talk about what you've heard with a friend or a neighbor or your life group. And to help you get started, we've got questions, resources, and more in the conversation guide, which is always in the show notes wherever you're listening. Also, Christmas is right around the corner, and we would love to invite you to one of our Life Church locations or to Life Church Online. Find out times and dates for Christmas services at www.life.church/Christmas. Have a great week.